As a gamer, I'm strongly driven by sprawling narratives, huge adventures, and conflicted characters. So the JRPG, a genre containing some of the biggest and most in-depth stories and characters gaming has to offer, is a natural love of mine. The following is not a list of the best JRPG stories per se, as there's far too many games I've not played for me to make a list like that and be confident in it. However, the following is simply a list of 10 JRPGs that I would recommend based on their story. Only rule I have is one game per franchise. Otherwise, all 10 slots would be filled with the same 3 franchises. If there is a game you think should be on a list like this, feel free to recommend it below. I only have 10 slots to work with and a limited knowledge base, so I can't cover everything. Also, given I am really big on stories, there will be a lot of crossover between my favorite JRPGs of all time and the JRPGs I would recommend based on their story, but I'm going to do my best to mix it up a little bit. So let's get into it. Number 10, The Legend of Dragoon. Perhaps the most by-the-numbers JRPG in this list, The Legend of Dragoon tells the story of Dart, as he ventures from his destroyed hometown to save his kidnapped childhood friend Shauna. As the journey unfolds, Dart finds new powers within him, and within the friends he makes along the way, which not only makes them powerful allies for nations that need them, but also prime targets by various different enemy forces that seek to use and abuse the power that they have. The party gets mixed up in various different wars and battles against dark forces, and are pitted against ancient powers that seem to reawake at their very presence, yet a mysterious figure from Dart's past will eventually prove itself to be the ultimate foe. Though much of the adventure is strikingly generic, it handles it all in such a simple and accessible way that it just feels like a comfortable, grand adventure, filled with lovable characters, memorable moments, beautiful locations, and some occasional heart-touching drama. Number 9, Parasite Eve. Parasite Eve's story isn't so good as it is memorable, and to a degree, how memorable a story is to me is a big determining factor of what makes it rank among my favorites. So how does a story that may be lacking in some regard become memorable enough to make it onto a list of best stories? Well, by being goddamn unique. In almost the entire genre, you will not find a story similar to Parasite Eve. Where most RPGs take place in high fantasy worlds where you go on epic globe-trotting adventures full of fun and friendship, Parasite Eve takes place in New York, and your epic adventure is full of horrifying imagery and watching your friends suffer. In Parasite Eve, you play as Aya, an NYPD newbie. After a blind date takes a turn for the crispy, you begin an investigation to find the cause. What follows is a strange tale of mitochondrial evolution, special powers, sperm banks, and Daniel Bodalis, New York's second biggest bamf, of course second only to Aya. Though the story definitely takes itself too seriously at times, it never actually stops the game from maintaining its eerie and brooding atmosphere, something that really makes it stand out within the genre as a whole. Parasite Eve doesn't exactly put its characters first, but if you're attentive enough, you'll notice that even over this game's short runtime, each character undergoes a meaningful transformation, and each character is actually fleshed out enough to have an important backstory to make them feel sympathetic and be just as memorable as the rest of the game. Number 8, Tales of Phantasia. I personally consider Tales of Phantasia to be the greatest adventure on the SNES. Though it's a technical marvel for the system, what shocked me even more was how fast the game could pull me into its characters and elicit strong emotional responses from me. Within the first 40 minutes of gameplay, you will see your first casualties, and it's hard not to feel something when you do. This beautifully constructed world is almost immediately emotive and immersive. As you discover the reason for the casualties, you begin a desperate chase across the world to hunt down a man named Deus. Only Deus has a power unlike any other the world over. When his position is compromised, Deus taps into the full extent of his abilities and sends you on a journey through time. As you journey through different time periods, you experience the world and characters at different points in history and fill in a lot of the game's background and lore, and try to change the future for the better. Though some of you may hear this and think of Chrono Trigger, the two games vary greatly in how they execute the themes, and for me, Tales of Phantasia handled it in a way that I truly adore, and the gravity of your actions in every time period and the events, both historical and present, that you must take part in feel very realized. On top of this, the cast of characters are very memorable, and with most of them having extremely strong introductions, it's hard not to get immediately attached to them. Number 7, Eternal Sonata. This is a strange entry on the list for me, because personally I wasn't too hot on this game when I played it, feeling the combat system eventually grated on me, and the game's gimmick of naming everything after music was hard for me to get into, as I was actually going through music and audio engineering school at the time, so it really got under my skin. Though I can't deny the story and characters here were something special that ought to be cherished. The world the game takes place in is an imaginative high fantasy one, where nearly everything feels new, creative, and inventive. In this game, we play primarily as Polka. Polka has magical abilities. However, in this world, those with magical abilities are sick people and are close to dying. Polka, in an attempt to live her life to the fullest, and in whatever useful or helpful way she can before dying, leaves her home and finds herself caught up in adventures bigger than she alone can handle. This adventure brings her to many places where she meets many friends as she attempts to solve some of the world's environmental and political issues. However, the underlying themes of this game are not just economic and ecological ones. Seemingly in contrast to the game's bright setting and innocent, cheery characters, this story is ultimately one of psychological issues, including, but not limited to, escapism. In this world, everything is named after music because the world is in fact fully imagined. The world is imagined inside the head of famous classical composer and pianist Frédéric Chopin. Chopin in the real world is on his deathbed, and when the man with talents that some would simply call magical passes on, the entire dream world within his head will collapse. This fact is known throughout the game, and knowing that this entire world could collapse at any moment, and that all of the problems in this made-up world are made up themselves, shifts the perspective of the world and its conflicts into a strange new territory for the player that I've frankly not seen replicated in any other game before. All in all, one of the major themes of this game is using escapism to find peace with death. Number 6. Valkyrie Profile. This is a game I haven't played since it was new, so forgive me, but a lot of the story is actually rather shaky in my mind at this point. Though it can't be stated enough how much a few key scenes truly affected me at a young age and solidified my likes and dislikes in story progression. What really stuck in my head more than anything was the intro arc, and I'm going to spoil the intro here to explain how this left such a big impression on me. So if you don't want the intro spoiled, click to the time code on the screen now. With that warning out of the way, let's go into it. At the start of the game, we focus on two characters, Platina and Lucian. Platina lives with her parents who treat her anything but well. The village they live in has fallen into an economic crisis, and the adults and working class folk turn to any manner of business to make cash. For Platina, her abusive parents plan to sell her into slavery. When her friend Lucian discovers this, he sets out with a child's ambition to save her. However, with a child's understanding of the world, consequence, and safety, this doesn't go quite as planned. As Lucian gets Platina out of the village and into the open, when all seems like freedom is just a step ahead of them, things take a turn for the worst. Lucian, in his ignorance, led Platina through a field of heavily toxic plants. Platina, having breathed in the toxins, dies then and there, in the arms of the child who tried his hardest to save her. Her short life filled with suffering had ended, with the only happiness in her life having been the friendship she experienced with Lucian, the one who inadvertently led her to her death. Valkyrie Profile has a large story beyond this, but themes of the loss of childhood innocence and guilt are prominent throughout and shape the direction of the adventure. This is a theme that I greatly value and hold in the highest regard, and one that's definitely worth exploring. Number 5. Utaware Ramono. This game is definitely more of a visual novel than it is a JRPG, with a roughly 85 to 15% split between visual novel content and the turn-based tactical RPG combat. But it is at the end of the day a JRPG nonetheless, and the story in this game is one of the highest caliber. Though technically it was released as more than one game, it is one full story. Utaware Ramono is one of the most original worlds fully detached from the real world that we know. You start as an amnesia-stricken man who does not know his own name, awaking alone in a mysterious location. Upon awaking, you're chased by a large monster and eventually get saved by a cat girl named Kuan. Kuon takes you in and takes care of you as you have nowhere else to go. What unfolds after this is a very mysterious and alluring tale. You are one of the last living humans in this strange world, and the fate of your kind is a dark history the world is not too keen on sharing. As you work to uncover the mystery, you live your life alongside Kuon and meet many new and lovable characters along the way. It seems like, at times, living a normal, peaceful life devoid of the mysteries of your past may just be a possibility, but strange things are afoot in the land all over, and you get caught up in political wars nonetheless, and the mysteries find ways to keep creeping up on you. At the height of the action, whenever it seems peace is just around the corner, the game reveals to you why it's such a memorable one for its story. The plot points in this game get very dark at times, and contrasted to the many slice-of-life, light-hearted moments you experience along the way, it proves itself to be a master of both of Shakespeare's biggest genres, the comedy and the tragedy. Udaware Ramono is a truly charming and truly tragic tale. Number 4. Final Fantasy Tactics. Though not a mainline Final Fantasy game, this one stands as my favorite Final Fantasy game in terms of its story, and my second favorite Final Fantasy of all time, second only to Final Fantasy IX. Again, I haven't played this one since it first came out, so the story is a little shaky in my mind, but Final Fantasy Tactics puts its world building and politics first, so if that's something you're into, as I am, this is a game you should definitely look into. Either the original on PlayStation 1, or the remake and expanded version War of the Lions on PSP. You can't go wrong. The story is centered on the land of Ivalice, where following the 50-year war, the land and populace is under immense political and economic pressure. But the pressures aren't nearly as simple as that. The king of Ivalice has passed on at the eclipse of the war, and what heirs exist to his throne are anything but fit to take on the role. This is where the story really begins, but things spiral out of control quickly when different factions of nobility pit themselves against each other to see their choice for ruler inherit the throne. The lengths they go to see this through are dark, and nothing is off limits. The betrayal and monstrosity displayed by some of these characters is quite reminiscent to me of Game of Thrones. The game themes from here focus heavily on issues pertaining to classism, and are unfolded through the eyes of two plot-central characters, one a commoner, and the other a noble, who despite being friends as children, grew up and grew apart, solidifying different ideals that would make them incompatible as friends. Number 3. Lost Odyssey. Lost Odyssey I don't only consider to be one of Hironobu's greatest works since leaving Square, but possibly his greatest work of all time. As previous entries in this list may have shown, how good I perceive a story to be is largely shaped by how much history the worlds and characters have. And there is no single game in this list with a character that can even begin to compete with the amount of history the characters in Lost Odyssey have, as our characters here are immortals. Though it may seem that telling the history of an immortal is an impossible feat, Lost Odyssey does it in a rather unorthodox manner, interrupting gameplay here and there to give you often very long, short stories detailing the events of the character's past. Where some people may find these boring, what they add to the characters and world is depth that's nearly unattainable in any other way. Through these stories, you come to understand the heart of the characters, the tragedies immortals are inherently bound to experience, and the conflict that lives within each of them, as some come to feel that their mere continued existence is hell itself. Lost Odyssey, though it does contain a fantastic main plot, is really a game about the characters, and an interesting exploration of how much hell and beauty immortality can allow you to see. It's also an interesting and damning look at the follies of mankind over time, with some stories detailing how simple things like race and unfamiliar languages can drive humans to commit unimaginable acts like genocide upon their contemporaries. The game is a testament to and study of humanity and humans, the most powerful life form in the known universe, and how pathetically weak and insecure we really are. Number 2. Xenogears. Occupying the same slot on this list as it did on my all-time favorite JRPGs list, we have Xenogears. Though the thought of putting Xenoblade Chronicles in here instead did occur to me, not much can really, truly compete with Xenogears. Xenogears may possibly be one of the most complex single-game JRPG stories ever made. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but there's no way to really sum up what this game is. The best I can do is make various comparisons to my favorite anime, Evangelion, but that wouldn't quite do it justice. Xenogears is a complicated adventure with complicated and flawed characters. Though an absolute rabbit hole of plot elements involving action, sci-fi, mech battles, corruption, war, and religion is up front for a lot of the game, psychology comes into play very, very heavily as it goes along. This mishmash of elements combines for one of the craziest and most in-depth stories I've ever had the joy of experiencing. But it is, as stated, the kind of story you cannot piece back together at the end and sum up in an easily digestible format. There's sadly no way for me to sell the story aside from saying that it's a combination of everything I love most. And despite Disc 2 being nearly a visual novel due to budget cuts, the story is fully here in all of its magnificence, begging to be explored by others. At one point in this game's development, it was going to be released as Final Fantasy VII, and if it had, this would easily have been the greatest of the Final Fantasies. Number 1. The Legend of Heroes. Yes, The Legend of Heroes, the whole series. While any arc of the series could be placed here, I figure it's simply easier to put the whole thing here instead. The Legend of Heroes has built something no other RPG series has really done, at least not on this scale. The Legend of Heroes itself is a spin-off of the Dragon Slayer series, yet within the Legend of Heroes there exist several other series of their own, most notably the Trails in the Sky series, which is a single game experience split up over 3 different installments, and Trails of Cold Steel, a single game experience split up over 4 different installments. Each sub-series in the Legend of Heroes can be played independently, though they all play into one massive, world-sprawling, overarching story that's best explained simply as The Legend of Heroes. This overarching story cannot be fully realized in any one game or any one sub-series, but across all of them together. It wasn't enough that every game had amazing stories and characters of their own, but they made it so that putting the games together forms a new amazing story on top of it all. Imagine what Marvel done leading up to the Avengers movies. But imagine it now as a series of infinitely complex 60 to 90 hour JRPGs all intertwining. Every game since Trails in the Sky has worked with a unified vision of the world, and every event in each separate sub-series happens in context to the rest of the series outside of it. The Legend of Heroes is a series with cohesion unlike any other. Every new entry strengthens the entries that came before it, and the ones that are going to come after it, and as such, the Legend of Heroes series is one massive unified experience on an unprecedented scale. While each series is enjoyable on its own, The Legend of Heroes has so much overarching and carried over narrative that it may as well be one single game experience itself, spanning 600 plus hours. The latest entries in the series are seeing each arc collapse into a single point in the timeline now, and creating a true organic unification of all the story arcs so far, as it builds up to a finale that may be unlike anything gaming has ever seen before. I'm getting hard just thinking about it. Anyway folks, those are 10 RPGs I would recommend based on their story. Thank you Patreon for the suggestion. If you guys like the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe. Links to socials are in the description. As always folks, thanks for watching.